I wanted to do an episode where we just kind of talk just identity from an aspect of like what you've seen, right? Like what we've seen over the last kind of like 15
Yep.
years, right? And also pick your brain and talk to you a little bit from the sales side of it, right? You've been a lot more involved on the sales side than I have, and trends that you've seen over the years, how you see things now, right? And I kind of want to spend a lot of time just talking about, selling in a market like this and where, why I believe, and you can disagree, but I think identity is one of those kind of defensive products and just kind of areas because this is, especially now as we understand like what it is, like, customers are still going to need this, right? And so while it may be a little bit tougher and you kind of have to, speak to the value a little bit more, it's not like this thing that's like, okay, they're just going to stop buying it. Like this is, it's kind of one of those areas where they always kind of need to have. So, and then just, we'll just free flowing from there, but that's kind of the gist of the conversation, kind of where I want to take.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think identity is due for a repositioning. Someone the other day said if there's a market more due for disruption, I can't think of a better one than identity. And it's fairly true when you think about it, right? I mean, there is so much that we can do around, for me, it's about enablement of the business, right? It's about pushing identity down in a way that it's not one admin team of six people that's your identity program. It's your
Right.
entire business. And if I'm sending insights via something like Slack or Teams, I can send 10,000 of them a day. And if I've got 100,000 users, no one even knows any different. But if I send 10,000 to six people, it's a whole other problem, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's all about pushing identity out, and the best identity is the identity you don't even know is happening, and it's all about being insightful. And to me, it's that mixture of being smart and being clever, and being smart, like, hey, let's use AI and figure out, a homophilic environment with high modality. People that have the same job function probably have the same job access. And so we can identify anomaly and whatever. But we can be clever. Like, Dave, if you get a new job and you request six things within 3 days of getting that job, what are you doing? You're right enabling yourself, right? So we can start looking for identity related events and push those down to the business in a way that it's actionable, right? And so it's binarily, click this button to accept this, and we will remediate it this way, or ignore it, or do whatever, right? And I think that's the way. If your delivery mechanism works, like a Slack or a Teams or something like that, the user is just doing their job. They look over, just
Yeah.
like you and I are messaging each other. They go yes, and they're back to their job. And that's the way identity needs to integrate into the underarching business, if you ask me.
Yeah, listen, I wholeheartedly agree. So before we get too far down the path, do me a favor, go ahead, introduce yourself, let people know like who you are, what your background is, right? I mean, I know you're infamous and I know you're famous, right? But
Yeah.
I'm still growing. I'm still growing this podcast, so not everybody that's listening may not have heard of you.
I mean, I'm so famous, I don't need to dress up. I just dress like I'm homeless, and everybody just assumes that I know what I'm talking about. That's the way this works. The more homeless you look, the smarter they assume you are.
So true.
No, so my name is Dana Reed. I work for Sailpoint. I've been there for, gosh, going on 12 years now. Worked with David long ago for quite a while. Been in identity almost 20 years at this point, and then spent a lot of time. My pedigree for education is out of the University of Michigan as a finance major, finance marketing. Wasn't supposed to be in IT. And then Anderson Consulting decided that the best thing that you could do for a finance marketing major was to make him a Java coder. And that's what I did, and learned some really good lessons from my early bosses about, like, oh, you don't know what you're doing? Maybe you should go read the book, and that was kind of the way I got into identity, and even just call it computer science or whatever. Was,
Right.
if you don't know what you're talking about, go learn it, go read it. And so spent some time at Microsoft where I really learned, I mean, arguably the hard way, what excellence looks like, and wanted to cry most days I was there, and to this day, I thanked them when I left, because I was just like, you got more out of me than I knew was possible. And it just taught me so much about what service means, right? In terms of a software provider, and even in consulting or whatever. But service means going above and beyond. It's not just what you know, it's about rethinking what you know, and demanding out of yourself and out of your people what they don't even believe they can do, and so that's kind of my background. I mean, I watch the shows on the Macintosh, with Steve Jobs or whatever, and everyone thinks it's just this horrific environment, but I understand it. I understand how going through that gauntlet was the worst experience of your life, and yet because you got out of it, you spent the rest of your life talking about the greatest experience of your life, and I look at Sailpoint, that not that Sailpoint's been a bad experience, but I look at what you and I have done at Sailpoint and kind of driving the identity market and being thought leaders in this market, and explorers and evangelists of this market. It's been fun, I think, for me, and I know for you as well, to kind of stand out front, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's been interesting watching the industry just kind of grow up, right? So I'm with you, right? I'm just around 20 years, in this crazy little niche market we call identity, and it's been fascinating and fun watching it come from this thing where we had to just kick and scream and get business to pay attention and buy, buying products, but actually invest in doing something here, to now to where to see how it's talked about, it's marketed, it's front of mind for customers. If I talk to any CISO, anybody in security, they now at least they understand what identity is, and really identity and access management. Let me say that, because I think in security they always understood what identity was, but it was a different definition than what we were using, right? You talked to security about identity before, and they're like, oh, like endpoint, like firewalls, like no one, like who, like, it's like, okay, that's part of it, but like past that, right? The actual access management piece. And so it's definitely been fun, right? Getting a chance to talk about it and help evangelize and grow this niche. With that though, I want to talk about your specific experience, like on the sales side and talking with customers, right? And how you've seen that the conversation grow and change over the last decade.
It's interesting, right? I think when and part of this maybe just a maturization in IT in general, right? But the initial reaction in sales that I got a long time ago was, "Hey, we want to blow the whole thing up, but when we implement this, can we just do exactly what we did before?" You know what I mean? And so you got to go, but I don't get it, and no one really had a vision. They just wanted to. They knew they want to get on a newer set of software, but then repeat all the mistakes of old. And in fairness, I'm not sure technology advanced fast enough. It's that curve, if you will, and I'm not sure it advanced fast enough for them to really have a good reason to say, let's blow all this up and like let's rethink the way that we're doing business. I have noticed since just the day before COVID, you had a lot of enterprise, and we'll call enterprise Fortune 500, that would be like, look, yeah, we're just moving over to SaaS and email and whatever, and maybe files, but we just don't see a place where we'll ever do SaaS for identity or some of our core infrastructure type. We need to have that control, right? And I think we did a good job of giving an opinion as to how things are done and those types of things. But the reality is that I think once COVID hit, I was in Australia, and it was so funny because everybody just went home. And people that didn't have privilege or didn't have SSO or all these things, they really, what it was they didn't have systems that had broken out of their firewall. And so because they had never had to break out of their firewall, they were stuck with all these people on the outside that couldn't get on the inside. And all of a sudden they had to make these huge changes. I know, like Beyond Trust and some other folks, they just gave it away for free. I mean, it was a great marketing campaign for them of like, try it before you buy it. And you had
Right.
people that were just ripe to get in. So now what we're seeing, I think, is anyone that is looking at identity. I look very similar to like when the African countries moved into putting phone lines in. They just skipped analog and went right to cellular, right? And I think we're seeing folks just skipping on-prem in general and just saying, nope, we're going right to SaaS. Well, you realize SaaS has these opinions. That's how things are done. Yep, that's the exact reason why we're doing it, because we don't want to walk into all the mistakes that we had of old. Now, the people that were already in it, that have our on-prem software, that is still a bit of a battle. Like mentally, they know, and the directive from above is, let's move towards SaaS-based software. Let's let the experts that have done this 1,000 times, they know the answers to the test. Let's take that test, right?
Right.
And we're going to ace it, and we're going to ace it. And so they have that mentality, but there are still rounded corners and edges, and in clients, I won't talk names, but most of them. You were involved in most of them. You helped code those requirements to handle those things. And so some of that is a bit difficult. We'll get halfway through the process and go, oh well, now that we realize we can't do this specific thing. But the reality for me is you walk back and you go, wait, hold on a second. I thought in the beginning of this you said you wanted to lose weight. And they go, well, we did. And you go, all right, well then you realize that you have to change your lifestyle to be able to lose weight. It's not just about saying you want to. Everybody wants to, right? But
Right.
who's going to act upon it. And then you can kind of pull them, I think, back a little bit to say, yep, you know what, you're right. I've yet to find one that is such a game changer that has to happen, but it is hard sometimes getting there. And there's like FDA regulations. That's where the gotchas are, like e-signature, things like that, where it's like, hey, man, I wouldn't do it if I could, but I can't because the FDA says for me to be in
Yeah.
business, this has to be the case. I think we do a good job, and probably all vendors, of identifying those and delivering on those. But undoubtedly, the desire in sales now is to move on to SaaS-based software, and part of it, honestly, is staffing. They can't get good people, and what's also happening is we've had enough people move around from client to client that they're
Yeah.
like, wait, how much have you done here? We had 300 apps on board. You have seven? Why? And then all of a sudden you start to see like the secret gets out to a degree, right? All of a sudden things change a little bit, and that's been fun to watch. But I will tell you, from a sales perspective, man, it's a whole lot easier now because you are running in the same direction. For so
Yeah.
long we were running in opposite directions, and
Yep.
I look at the guys that kind of cut the path of identities SaaS software. All their names. I really I now understand the journey they went on, and the Sherman Trail they had to cut. You know what I mean? It wasn't a good one for those guys. It was not easy. So, but,
Yeah. No,
but
definitely. Go ahead.
are you seeing it? What are you seeing?
Yeah. So I'm seeing, two things, kind of two bigger trends from people I talk to, right? And it's one. So the baseline is they absolutely get it, right? They are. I will say that our customers understand identity so much more than obviously they did when we started, but the depth of understanding of the importance that they have for it is, I hate to say surprising. I got to think of a better word, but it's also delightful. It's like, okay, you get it, right? So now, as I'm talking to them, what I'm seeing is it's much more. The questions are much more centered around how do we get the most out of this, right? It's we get it, and we've done our governance and our SSO and our privilege. We've got all this stuff working. What's the next evolution? What's the next step? Like, how do I continue to get value out of this? Because I'm kind of past that arc of return on investment of like, yes, I got my apps and I can provision them and all that good stuff or whatever, but now what? Because they are getting hammered from above. Like, are we still spending on this? Like, why am I still spending this
Yeah.
much amount on identity? What is this thing? This is like plumbing. Like, why are we still like? Why is this still a thing? And so now it's how do we have that conversation, right, with the rest of organization, with our executives about why this is important and what it does for the value of the business. And so the first thing is like the conversation is shifting to like explaining what the value of identity is now going forward, because they've kind of done the table stakes stuff for the most part. And the second part of that is what I'm calling like operationalizing identity, right? So now that I have all this stuff, like how do I truly get some automation and start doing, for lack of better term, some cool shit with all of this, right? Because now I'm trying to say that identity truly is part of security, and so I'm seeing security teams and identity teams come together, and they're like, but how does identity act as a part of my security operations and what my security analysts, what does that actually mean? So those are kind of the conversations and trends that I'm seeing. And obviously in a more of a micro environment, because I don't, not yet, don't have the access like a Sailpoint out there. So I'm not talking to hundreds and hundreds of customers, but just in some general conversations around I'm having, like that's what I'm hearing from like CISOs and IT leaders is like, how do they kind of take that next step with it?
I think like we as identity professionals talk auth Z, privilege, right? We talk about these different channels of cyber, but when you think about the end user, it's just someone nagging them about something, right? And they
Yeah.
don't care if it's coming from a ping, Microsoft SSO, Octasource, like Beyond Trust, CyberArk, Source, SailPoint. I mean, there's no one cares, right? And so I think what we need to do a better job of is marketing this as program dollars and not project dollars, right? And for a
Mm,
long time, the dollars were absolutely project dollars, and they
yeah.
were they were swim lane down. You know what I mean? And I think there are some things that can be built to obfuscate where these messages are coming from, because who cares, right? It's just you either want to change your password because it's expiring, you want to extend a contractor, you want to grant access to a safe, or be notified that the 5-minute access to that safe had been removed. get a link that says, here's the session monitoring, right? Or find out that David did impossible login from China, right? Those things from an end user's perspective are coming from the same, godlike entity, right? It's
Right.
just that it's like Genghis Khan, right? I don't know if you're a big history person, but when Genghis Khan died, he split up like their territory to his three sons. And like one was like the guy that was like the leader. One did legal, and the other one did like the military, I guess. So they all had their own place. But from an end user, it was still just like the Genghis Khan, the empire, going out, and the Mongols going out and conquering, but they all did kind of different things, And there's a really interesting story there on a side note. Apparently, the guy that was the leader had a huge alcohol problem, which I mean, look, back in the Mongol days, not a whole lot to do. And so his brother, who was the guy who was on the compliance side, was like, "Look, man, you got to stop. Like, you're drinking way too much. You are now limited to 2 drinks a night." And so the leader brother came in one day with this huge chalice, just gallons of booze. So the point is, as much as things change, things don't change much. But I think that's kind of thing. In fact, I was thinking about us talking today, and kind of just some analogies in my head, and this one popped in my head. We all travel a ton, right?
Yeah.
And today you're going to Detroit, tomorrow you're going to Atlanta, next day you're going to Brussels, whatever. Now, when you show up, the plane is being gassed. It's being readied. It's being all of the needs of that flight are on the flight, ready for you to get on. And when it's not ready, you get angry, you get upset, because you're sitting there waiting, and you value your time so much at that moment of like, why isn't this thing going on time? When in reality, how many times are your friends 15, 20 minutes late? Every single weekend, right? But when your plane's 20 minutes late, you're furious, right? And I think that's what I've been recognizing is what identity is we expect when you change jobs. And maybe the panacea is when you get to that new job, you're ready to go. That plane, get on board and take off. But if you have to go and start asking people for new access, and kind of to my point earlier, like right sizing yourself to really do what you need. And sometimes you may not even notice that until you're in mid-flight, and you're like, "Hey, did you pack the peanuts? The what? Oh, we should." And then now, well, now no one's getting peanuts for the next 2 hours. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's that type of thing, and I think that's really what. When I look at the way identity needs to move, it's basically solving that fundamental basic problem of just like, how do we get people what they need before they ever know they need it, but
Yeah.
in a way that is controlled, right? And
Yeah.
that's when I say, is identity due for disruption? I think the answer is yes. And identity meaning even privilege and authenticity, all of it,
Oh yeah.
because I think there's just it's moving closer to the business, and it's becoming more and more and more invisible. And man, remember when you used to have to log into like Pine and look for email and try to figure out what's going on? Now an email just shows up, and it's just part of, I mean, your ability to get a communication from someone across the globe and respond to it. You're still walking down the road, you're still talking to your parents, you're still doing whatever. That's where I see identity kind of moving now, is like in this way that you don't even know it's happening. It's hard to value that, because the only time you value it is when it doesn't happen,
It's what
right?
is when it doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's when dinner's late, and you know,
Yeah. I look. I agree that, two statements I'll make on this. One, that identity needs to become more ubiquitous and just kind of in the background and just kind of interconnected, right? Because truly, when you start to look at business process and start to help customers with this in any implementation, that's you see identity at all different types of aspects, right? So it's like, hey, let's use a Slack example, right? So Slacking with teams, we're doing this, whatever. Somebody pops up a document and shares it. Okay, we got this, whatever. Now we need to do something else. Like, hey, go access this and run this report or whatever. Well, I don't have access, right? Because I just joined on this team, so I just joined in the Slack channel, right? So now I need to go get access. And the beautiful part of it is like that context is like sitting like right there in the Slack channel of what's needed, and the people who probably need to quote unquote approve it and give you the justification are probably sitting there in that Slack channel, right? So the ability to say like, right now we're saying, okay, we'll go off to this other system, request this, do this thing, like just kind of break out of your flow, right? And then come back in and then get working when everything gets said and done. When the reality is we could move it to where it's like, okay, stay within that same flow. Oh, you need access to this, no problem. hey, Dana, you're going to need this access. Let me send you the link to the app of the access, and in doing so, by that part, like the manager's there, like, hey, can you approve this for them? Like, what, just we can truly work that into the actual that current flow, and to the point that they never truly leave Slack, so they don't know what the system is behind it. That, to your point, they gave it to them. It was security, the almighty security program, Skynet, that said, yeah, sure, here you go, here's your access. But as from the user's standpoint, like they never know the difference, and that makes sense, especially if we start to look at identity becoming, truly part of security and acting more security operations like, to where it's like, hey, this is going to happen. It's get approved on the back end. We can see everything that's happening. We can track when it was requested, who approved it, all these things, or whatever. All the details that we need to know from a security perspective to do investigations, to figure things out, to satisfy the auditors. We can do that without actually, truly interrupting and involving the user, right? And I think we're on the tip of that. We're starting to kind of understand it. We've tried it as an industry for a while, like with integrations and different things or whatever. And it's always seemed as like, okay, kind of one-offs and nice to have. But I think as we start to look at this, it's going to become more of this is what's required, right? I think the customers are going to start to ask for this, right? But it's one of those things that they're going to ask for it in a way that we have to be listening and in tune, because we're not going to understand it, right? Identity's just it's just technical enough to where a customer's not going to lay out exactly everything that they want, right? But they're just going to say, hey, I've got this kind of general pain point. I would like it if it does this. And we've got to be attuned enough to go, I got it. Understand what you're trying to say. You don't want this flow interrupted. Like, here's the type of things that we can do, right? I always use, like, Steve Jobs and Apple and the whole iPod thing. Nobody wanted an iPod until it was there, right?
Oh,
Until
yeah.
Steve Jobs walked across the stage one day and said, now you can have 10,000 songs in this little device. And we're like, oh, shit, that's exactly what I want. But nobody before that said that that's what they wanted. And then they saw it and was like, that's it.
There's a book from long ago called "The Clock of the Long Now," and if anyone that's listening to this, if you want to see a book that the internet, or I mean computers started with, read the book "The Clock of the Long Now," and it talks about the singularity theory and all. The idea is that they wanted to. I actually think Jeff Bezos built this because this is how prolific this book is. But the idea was like we progressively move time to being shorter and shorter and shorter, right? It's all about how fast can we get something. Well, the idea, like in galactic time, what if we built a clock that like every second was a year, right? And every minute was 100 years, right? So we slowed down time to the. But anyway, they talk about the clock of the long now, and they talk about the singularity theory and how we're kind of getting to the point of things being just closer and closer. But anyway, in the book, what they talk about is the guy goes, imagine this is a book from like the 70s. He goes, imagine a point in your life and I read this when the 10 disc changer was released, right? Imagine a device in which every song ever written was available to you on that one device. And they were like, that's going to happen one day. And when I saw it, when I read it, I was like, well, I mean, like, we got one disc changers. I have a 5 disc changer. This released a 100 disc changer. I'm like, I could totally see that. But when you think about what the internet is, right, and you think about your iPhone, you have access to every song ever written in the history of the world on one device now. And that tells you like what the iPhone did was it just moved human nature closer to human nature, right? Like technology moved itself more towards the way humans interact. And
Right.
that's why they got it right. And that's what I think identity for the longest time, when you think about identity tools, what were they? They were workflow tools, right? They were workflow tools that we branded with forms and called them identity because we gave them identity related tasks, right? It's like, there are dogs that are worker dogs, and you go, well, this dog's a worker dog because it's a sporting dog. Well, some just work playing sports, some work by carrying things, right? But they're just doing different stuff. And that was what we did. But I think where identity needs to go now is it is no longer a start flow, end flow type of interaction, the use case interaction. It's a conversation. And when you're not in the midst of a flow, you're just in a rest step, right? And so the minute you get hired in, your conversation begins, and the minute you leave, your conversation ends. And I could argue that way after you leave, that conversation still continues up until your death, which is a whole other argument. But there's a mindset there, right? And it's all about this conversation mindset. It's all about starting talking to someone and then continuing that as we go. And also, it's about bring other people into the conversation.
Yeah.
So as an example, if I do an access request and you requested it, don't you also want to know when it was approved? And if it gets escalated, don't you want to know that, hey, this is taking a little bit long? It's now in Dana's queue, as well as Dana wants to know because it's in my queue and the person that was requested for. So it's like, you see those like pop up, what do they call, like pop up songs or whatever, where a guy will like stand in a mall and start singing, and then someone stands up and starts singing. And next thing you know, you got 12 people all singing together. That to me is what cyber needs to do, right? And what we've all been doing is standing in the mall by ourselves, singing our own song. And we all need to recognize that there's someone else right next to us singing the same song we are, or at least singing in a way that is harmonic.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, off Z joins in, and then off N joins in, and then privilege joins in, and that conversation really now becomes a choir, almost a cyber choir, for lack of a better term. And I know I'm going way off the rails on this one, but you get what I'm saying, right? And I think that's what I've been pushing so much on, is just like, let's rethink how this works. Even this is such a minute difference, but bear with me on this one. For forever, when we talk about identity, right, we are adding an entitlement to an identity, right? You make an access request. I want to be on domain admins. We're adding domain admins to the user. But what if the real philosophy was we're actually adding identities to entitlements, right? So completely, it's a small difference,
Right.
but the way you look at it flips, right? And so now you're looking at it not as what did Dana join, it's what joined me, right? What joined domain admin and left domain admin. And I think there's a lot we can think about there of just taking everything. The biggest problem with identity is we've done it this way for so long that we need people like yourselves, like myself. I can think of Mike Kaiser, some other folks that are out there that are thought leaders that will just question it and go, well, wait a minute, why?
Right.
Who's like, okay, that's the way it's always been, but who cares? Like, it's last I checked, I can have an opinion, and you can have an opinion. And so what if we just question all of this and rethink it? And to me, a new identity kind of, a world of identity falls out of that.
Well, yeah, and look, but I would even go so far as to say this: by definition of being technologists, which is what we are if you're in this field, right? And technology is what for the last 3 decades we've seen is just absolute change, right? That's what it is. It's constantly looking at different things. How do we make new things using existing technology to make certain things better and change certain aspects of business life, etc. So by definition, if you're a technologist, you're in this field, like you are a change agent. So absolutely, we should all be questioning things that we're doing and going along, because just because we've always done it this way, that should never be a solid answer for anyone, period. We say that and we hear that, we go, okay, well, it's nice it's always been that way, but why? Let's start looking at it, right? Because a lot of these decisions of why they've always been that way was because of decisions of limitations that they had at that time. I go back to, I think of Iron Man, right? When Tony finds the video from his father and he tells him, Tony, I am limited by the technology of my time, right? And so he knew, I'm going to leave this message for my son because I've gone as far as I can possibly come. I can't think of any other way to do this because things that I need to do don't exist, right? But one day you will, because you'll take a look at this problem and you'll have different technology and you'll be able to solve it. Like that right there, right, is exactly where all of us should be thinking. It's like, okay, well, we made this decision 30, 40, 50 years ago. Hell, even 10 years ago. Hell, in tech, 2 months ago. I mean, just look how fast things move. Yeah. We made this decision then. Let's look at it again and say, why did we make this decision? What led us to, what limiting factors did we have that led us to design it this way? Do those things still exist? Oh, well, 2 of them don't? Well, then let's start thinking about this, right? Because you're right. Like identity does need to shift and evolve, and it's going to, right? By just sheer force of being a technology industry, right? It's going to change, right? We're going to see a shift in how things are done, and so it's going to have to catch up. I just think that we're in a good position where we can lead that change. We can look ahead of it and go, okay, we see where things are going. Let's start to develop and question and create this flexibility to do identity in different ways that are truly more tied in, with the business and kind of flow with it. I'm really excited over like the next decade of what's going to happen in identity. There's some really cool things that I think that we can do and apply to, truly get this to where a lot of us that are, that are true like technophiles, and we've been in this forever. We see all these things, like
Yeah.
things that we said, well, that'll never happen because the business will never accept it. I think we'll see that shift in the next decade. Like I truly do. I personally like. I think things like access requests. Like I think they'll be a thing of the past. I think they'll just disappear. Like honestly, it'll be in this
Yeah.
contextual kind of like you're in Slack, you're in Teams, you're in whatever new chat system is going to be created in 2 years because we create a brand new one like every couple of years, right? Whatever it is. But in that conversation, you're talking about what you need. It's like, oh, okay, well, here's the access request. Yeah, I need access to this code. No problem. Boom. And it's just in the background, it's just done. It's like, okay, great. You got it. You need that. I'll go provision it. Knock yourself
Well,
out.
I think there's 2 points that I'd make here. The first one is on what you're talking about, access requests. I think we're seeing, you hear the terms RBAC, ABAC, PBAC, et cetera. I don't think a lot of people understand really the differences between the two or the three. And I think what I always go back to is they go, oh well, isn't RBAC also ABAC if you have birthright rules? It's like the answer is no, it's not, because it's not in the session. Like when the actual authorization takes place is really the difference between PBAC, ABAC, and RBAC, and people don't really understand that. And I think to your point, we're going to progressively get into real time authorization, and that's going to change a lot of things. And with data science and whatever, I think that's going to be a whole lot easier to figure those things out. To your point, it kind of spawned into something in me of I think I'm now 45 years old. I've been in this 20 years. You ever been to I was at the F1 race, right? Standing in the line to get a beer. The line's 35 people long. Standing there waiting to get a beer, waiting to get a beer. I finally get to the front of the line. I look behind me. There's no one behind me. Like I was the last guy in line the entire time walking up. And the analogy I'm making is I feel like in identity right now, that is us. There aren't a lot of people that are younger than us that are coming out challenging the status quo. Maybe they don't want to be an identity. I mean, look, it's a super sexy business to be in. I get it, but we aren't seeing those younger people that are coming down and then challenging things. Or the other answer is they are, and we're not listening to them. We're going, oh well, you don't get it, right? And so I think we need to stop and think about like what are other people telling us? How do others want to work? I remember when I saw people moving from on-prem Outlook. It was Duke University, I think is who it was. They literally had to go to Gmail for students and they had to go to Outlook for staff simply because students tag everything, younger people tag everything, and older folks put them in folders. And neither side wanted to budge, right? And so I think we need to stop and go, well, what identity are we building, right? And like, is our brain, are we rebuilding identity that was seeded in us in the past, or are we really looking at like how can we? I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of this, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. But I was sitting there one day, and I'm like, okay, for access requests, I make an access request for 6 months. So it's the beginning of time. We will approve it, and we'll give it to you for 6 months. You have it for 6 months. Well, all of a sudden now this least privilege concept comes in, zero standing privileges comes in. Well, what if I'm giving it to you for 6 months, but how long are you really using it? What if I gave it to you for 30 days and said you're approved for 6 months? But now, if I can give you, to your point, if my technology has evolved in a way that I have a vehicle to give it back to you that's frictionless, i.e., no approval required. Why? Because it's already approved. All of a sudden, you go into Slack and you go, I need it back. A Slack bot, I mean, heck, ChatGPT can probably figure out what it is you need without even asking, right? And you just go, I need my access back, and it gets it back to you in real time. Now, you can still do out of session management of authorization, but you can do it essentially in real time. And now what you have is you have users that are sitting at a zero standing privileges place. So you can't, if you were to hack them, you can't do much with their accounts because they're not using it. But metrics around renewal metrics. Do you realize you're giving this to people for 6 months, but only 1% of people have renewed it after 2 weeks? What does that tell you, right? And then you get data science to start honing those things in. And all of a sudden he goes, well, actually, we used to give it to you for 6 months, but data science says now it should be a 3-week window or whatever. And that's
Right.
completely changing the way we're doing things. But that doesn't really, it goes back to your point about the iPhone, right? We're moving more towards the way people interact with computers and technology than away from it. And I remember my dad, he was an architect. And when he left, he worked for a company called Hayworth. They make office furniture. And when he left, he told the people, he goes, I'm 66 years old, whatever. The train has stopped. I've gotten off. I looked back, and the train is leaving the station. And you know what, guys? It's okay. You guys use CAD, you use all these things that technology, I don't know how to use any of that anymore. I'm still used to doing pen on paper. And I do look at identity in that way of like The train has stopped. It's leaving the station again, and where is it going? And whoever wants to be on board better be ready for where this train is going, because it's going to go faster. It's going to be a crazier ride, and it's going to be very different. It's going to accelerate at a faster speed than what it ever was in the past. And to people like you and me, and like Mike Kaiser and all these guys that we know, that's exciting. That's super
Yeah.
fun. But it does change. It changes the way you have to think about identity. It changes your ability to challenge other people that may be your superior in terms of a vice president or something. I'm going, no, 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 you don't get it. Like, let me rephrase the way this needs to be done, and that's exciting. Like, that to me is super super fun. It's going to be challenging and disruptive, and anytime you have disruption in anything, you have pushback, and I guess all you hope. I remember working at Microsoft, we would just yell at each other for it'd be an hour meeting. Within 18 minutes, people yelled. The person that yelled the loudest knew what they were talking about, and we'd walk out of there with it, in 22 minutes, because there was no reason to stay. We figured out the answer, but everyone just came in with passion, and if you didn't know what you were talking about, you didn't speak, and
Right.
you quickly learned you didn't want to be in the meeting if you didn't want to contribute, because everybody also recognized that you didn't say anything. You know what
Right.
I mean? And we're recognizing that now in identity, right? There are a lot of people that are saying stuff, and there are a lot of people that aren't saying stuff, and that's an interesting dynamic for me to watch.
Yeah. And so listen, like you touched on a topic that I'm extremely passionate about, right? It's we need to we need to make sure that the platform is available for everybody. Here's what I mean by that, right? We've got a lot of people who've been in this for a long time. They've seen a lot of things. We have to make sure as an industry that we're talking about these things, that our experts and our thought leaders are saying their experience and what they know, but they're not conveyed in such a way that says, but I can't be moved, that I can't be persuaded by a new way, right?
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of conversations, right? And I've over the years, and I've been like a part of panels and side discussions and things like that, to whatever, where a lot of people agree on stuff, and they're like, yeah, we did it this way and we did this. Oh, but we tried this years ago and it just didn't work then. Like, everybody's agreeing. And I think about that. If I'm a new person that's coming in and I'm like, I got all these ideas, but I hear that, right? So I hear all these people, 15, 20 years experience, and they're saying they tried this before and it just doesn't work. They've forgotten more than I even know at this current point about identity. Do I feel safe enough to step up and say, but hey, have you thought about that, right? Like, we do need to make sure that we're creating a path for everybody to say, look, this is a chance to do some of this evolution. Speak up and give your ideas. Maybe we say, hey, we tried this before and it didn't work, but here's why. Like, has anything changed over here? And then we have a conversation, but we've got to be open to it
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And I will, I said it in my newsletter a couple of editions ago. Like, look, we've got some gatekeepers in this industry, and I personally don't like it. Like, we need to stop that mentality, like all of
Yeah.
it, right? Like, every question, everything needs to be challenged, accepted. It's okay, right? Like, it's the natural evolution of things and of this technology market that we're in. Like, things are going to be questioned, decisions are going to be made. It's like, well, why'd you guys do it this way? Well, this is what we knew at the time. Let's talk about what's different, right? We've got to be open to that. And to your point, like, no, there's not a lot of younger people coming to identity because they don't really know about it. We've got to do a better job of saying, like, why would I want to come into the field? What's exciting about it? What am I going to get, right? And to be honest,
Yeah.
if I look and I see that, well, here's this industry I want to go in, and I look around, I go, yeah, but it's a bunch of boring looking people that don't look like they're having much fun. Why would I want to jump in there? So there's things there, right, that we can do to kind of better sell our industry, honestly, but to also make sure that we've got to make sure that not only are we putting the ladder down for people to climb up, but that we're also putting a hand down and saying, hey, like, come on up here, come into the treehouse, come hang out.
So
Right?
yeah, so let me ask you something, because we're close friends, and I do watch a lot of the stuff that you post. What are your thoughts then on identity, and then go on the diversity side? People of color, different religions. I mean, it is a global problem, and people are interacting with our tools. When I was over in Germany watching the Germans interact with our tool, people in India, in Africa, like it's everybody uses it differently. What are your thoughts on where we are and where we need to be in terms of who's contributing, I guess, to the identity problem?
Yeah, so I can be honest, this is my part. I don't work for anybody. Like, look, we need to do a better job of representation. Like, and it's I will acknowledge the challenges here, right? we've got to be able to reach out and get other people to talk. So get these people to talk about their experiences and help get them out there so other people can see that they can see themselves, right? That is the biggest thing. If you don't see yourself in a position, or you don't see yourself in an industry, you're not going to think anything of it, right? So let's just take the example you just used, right? So Germany, Africa, India, like when we start having whatever we're doing, if it's a webinar, it's a brochure, whatever it is, like if these people are comfortable, like get them out there to say, hey, talk about your experience with it, right? And sometimes the biggest thing is like a lot of people aren't comfortable, right? It is I mean, Dan, like you and I are different. Mike, like getting on camera, getting in front of stage, and what I tell people is you don't have to do all that, like, but just simply hop on put your name on a review or something like that. Do a brochure, do a blog post or something. But we've got to make sure that we're reaching out and creating those avenues. So I would challenge all vendors, like your marketing departments, right? Like be creative when you're thinking about that, right? Instead of giving it to a Dana or a Mike, like see if there's somebody else in your organization. Go find a customer. Yeah. Can we do this? Can we do this kind of blog together and do that or whatever? But we've got to make sure that we're creating a space where, again, people feel like their voice can be heard. So right now, what I see is we've got a problem of like most of the identity companies. You go look at it, like it looks like the life of a middle-aged white man from 30 to 55. That's what you see. Like leadership team, there it is. It's like, oh look, there he is, right? Same thing. Like you go look at the teams. Right? I mean,
middle-aged white guy. I take offense.
Webinars, you see the family, like so. And look, right? It's hard to find, like for a marketing person, whoever they're doing, it's hard to find somebody that's knowledgeable and that it's comfortable speaking, to the topic. I get that, right? But here's my challenge, and here's where I say it's hard if you're constantly thinking about it in a corporate mindset. Or it's got to be this forced kind of function thing. Like, dude, people are on freaking TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube all the freaking time. Take some of the corporateness out of it. Just make it relaxed and fun. Like, just do like a Zoom call, like, hey, come talk about this or whatever, and make that your content. Like, just find different ways to get people to lower that barrier of like, let's not make this super crazy official corporate-y. Let's have some fun. Let's get it at it, and we can open that up and probably get some more kind of diverse candidates in there. And so that way people, one, it expands the conversation, right? But it also, again, from a visual standpoint, like representation absolutely matters. People have to be able to see themselves, right? If they don't see themselves in the people that work in there, they're not, most of the time, they're not going to do it.
It's interesting, right? Because we, for so long, early identity, the way in which we, quote unquote, handled a lot of this from a UI perspective was localization into languages, right? And it was like, oh, well, we're going to now make it speak French, or we're going to make it speak Canadian French or German or whatever, Polish, whatever language, Portuguese, whatever language we needed to speak. But I do think when you're talking about if identity is truly going to become a ubiquitous conversation that starts when you're hired and ends at some point whenever, I think your point is really, really valid about the way we present identity to the end user has to acknowledge who that end user is or could be, right? And the way that when I talk about SaaS, right, I always talk about, look, the way in which we deliver identity to you, the way in which you consume it, and the way in which you digest it completely is modernized, right? And I think that's the way it happens now, but on a micro basis, right? Every individual user, right? The way that we deliver identity to them, the way they consume it, and the way they digest it, meaning the action they take upon it, right? It has to be done in a way that is clean, and I guess maybe Apple got it right because they recognize like we can all swipe and there's no cultural bias in the way people want to use their hands and everybody does it the same way, but maybe that's how we have to start thinking about is can we deliver identity in a way that no matter who is on the receiving end of it, they can use it just like anybody else can. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting, and then you have the other side of this is the contributors to that, right? I mean, who's actually, who's in the meeting and those types of things, because you're right. I mean, predominantly, it's amazing to go see when you're out at our conventions now. I mean, the number of women, people of color. I mean, there's all, ethnic diversity, sexual orientation, whatever. It is not the way it was when I first started here 12 years ago. I mean, it was a very different convention, and frankly, it's just better, right? You do feel like finally we're getting security is evolving to a place where it's ubiquitous because the contributors to it are a ubiquitous collection of the world, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, look, I will say it's definitely better. And I see that, and my thing is like, then we need to pour gasoline on this, right? Let's make sure that it doesn't slow down, right? Because I was just talking about this. I think I don't know, is it a blog or something like that? But like, it's different now because from 0 to 1 is still more, right? But on a scale of 100, it's still shitty, right? On average, when we look at it, I was like, the percentage is still like in the single digits of women, person of color. Like when you start to look at it, it's still low, but it's so much better than it was before. But that's because like we went from 0 to 3, right, or 3 to 5, right? We need to make sure that we don't take that as a win and go like, okay, let's continue to add on to this, right? And it turns into a completely different discussion, the whole DEI thing or whatever. But it doesn't have to. I don't stand for the bullshit of like it has to be this whole program and all this stuff or whatever. And then it's like, but we're hiring people for the sake of this. Like, no, it just means like you actually have like real and open conversations, real and open, like you just put a little bit of thought into it and go, okay, I want to make sure that if I do this, I want it open to as many people as freaking possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, this goes back to that. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to that book, The Clock of the Log Now. They talk about the singularity theory, right? And it's like 2 to the x accelerates, right? That curve is an accelerating curve. And so, you're right. When you go from, 2 to the 0, 2 to the 1, 2 to the 2, it doesn't appear to be moving that fast. But to your point, as you pour gasoline on that fire, that curve does start to accelerate to a point at which it becomes vertical, where all of a sudden that variable doesn't matter any longer, right? In the grand scheme of things, it becomes so significant it's insignificant, right? It was the whole thing about technology of memory at some point in time, and the whole idea behind their singularity curve was, if you look at like our parents, right, when they were growing up, if someone was a sophomore in college and a person was in 9th grade, they could probably talk to each other because the technologies they used, the way they interacted in life was fairly similar.
Yeah.
You put a person in college and a 9th grader together right now, completely different people. and I mean, what they find good in music, in video game, I mean, the way they interact with anybody is completely different. So that was the whole idea behind the singularity theories. At some point in time, you could be born tomorrow and not even be able to understand the person that was born yesterday because technology has changed so much in that time.
Yeah.
But it also, on the flip side of that, it's like, well, then the technology no longer becomes the barrier to how we interact. And I think that's what's happening ideally with with acceptance and relations of all genders, ethnicities, etc. But I think there's definitely work to do in our industry, and part of it is just that it's a specialized business that not a lot of folks want to go. It's not the sexiest of businesses, right?
Well,
so we're going to lag, but it's okay.
Look, that's definitely another part of it, right? Like it's definitely not something that like somebody looks at and wakes up and goes, I want to be an identity not just individual, right? Like it's not not in the slightest, right? And that's a different aspect of it, right? That we've talked about. I've had a bunch of conversations in ID Pro about it, right? And how do we, when they came up with the Certified Identity Pro like test and exam and that nature, like how much some board members have talked about doing some work with different universities, right? Like it's got to become a thing, like a known thing that people even know that it's there. Because quite honestly, like if you don't, it's not even something that people like know about. Right? Like if you could go and study computer engineering or cybersecurity, all these things or whatever, in college or universities, but you don't know like that identity like even exists. And that's another part of it, right? Which is interesting. So look, man, we're right at about an hour, man. So we're gonna wrap it up because we know people attention spans are all of that long nowadays. So, but dude, it's exactly what I want. It's been great talking to you, man. That's why I wanted to have you on the pod.
Yeah.
I was like, this is
always fun, man.
You're gonna be you're Identiverse at the end of the month.
I will not be. No, at least as of now, I'm not going to be. But I was at the one, here in Denver. But I a lot of those, I traveled for a lot of them recently, and then this year for some reason, I just haven't gone to them. I've been doing other things, and there's so much changing inside of Sailpoint, and I think we're in a position, luckily, to I think act upon a lot of the things that we just talked about here today, which makes me excited to be a part of that team and where we're going. But yeah, I won't be there, but and I will say, man, I love those things, but how many can you go to? You know what I mean? How many times I probably am due for a break before to rekindle that fire to go back
Yeah.
and
Listen,
see
man,
everyone again. And
I get it, man. It becomes like, I can't say regardless, I would go. It's one of this one I make sure every year that I'm like, if I'm going, I will conserve my energy for that one, right? I think I have the most enjoyable and in-depth identity conversations at this conference, obviously, right? I mean, it's a
is it
conference.
Vegas? It's Vegas this year?
Yeah,
It's Vegas. Where is it? Okay,
Aria Hotel.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. The
It's
only non-gaming, non-smoking hotel in all Las Vegas.
It's the first year that's in Vegas.
Sounds great, Dave.
Right. And I personally, I love Vegas. I know a lot of people hate it, but I mean, it's great. The shows.
We can leave on this, but that hotel, I believe they fixed it. I don't know how they did, but it's a giant parabola, and so all the windows were mirrored windows, and so for the longest time they had to have people basically walk around with like cones, because as the sun would hit it, it would go down to where the pool area is, and it would create basically a death ray. Like when you were a kid and you used to use like a magnifying glass and like kill ants. They built an entire hotel that did that for people. And so they had to somehow fix it. But yeah, the Aria you can Google it. It was like a gigantic death rave for bathers outside of it.
and only you would know that, Dana. So yes, on that. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining the Identity Jedi Show podcast. You can listen on Spotify, Apple, all the streaming Spotify platforms. You can also check out the video portion of this on YouTube, on the Identity Jedi Show, on the Ebony Ascent YouTube channel. Also, you can subscribe to the newsletter, theidentityjedi.com. You can go there for all the stuff that's going around the Identity Jedi universe. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, be kind to each other, be good to each other, love each other. We'll see you guys soon.
I will dress up next time. See you, buddy.
See you, man.
Thanks for listening to the Identity Jedi Show podcast, or watching the Identity Jedi Show podcast if you're looking at this on YouTube. Appreciate all the love. Make sure to follow, rate, subscribe wherever you're listening to this on streaming platforms, on the YouTube page. And be sure to check out theidentityjedi.com for all the latest. You can subscribe to the weekly newsletter, catch up on the blogs, and just support for your boy. Make sure you join the referral program too. We got free swag for you. You can share the Identity Jedi newsletter with all your loved ones. We appreciate it. Until next time, be good to each other, be kind to each other, love each other. We'll see you.